Number 6, Fairy Tale of New York by the Pogues. Now, this one I'm very generally sure many of you would definitely recognize, and possibly relate to as well. Named after a novel by Irish American writer J.P. Donlevy, this Celtic punk ballad centers around an Irish immigrant, sung by Pogues lead singer Shane MacGowan, spending Christmas Eve in a drunk tank, which is a prison cell used for drunk and intoxicated people, and recollecting a time when he was with his ex-lover, played by guest singer the late Kirsty MacColl. Some people thought it was Shane who had passed away, but it was actually Kirsty. At first, they have a very optimistic and idealistic view when they first go to New York City, with cars big as bars and rivers of gold. Hopefully, if they dive into said river of gold like Scrooge McDuck would, they won't get their bones shattered, like what happened with Peter Griffin that one time. Both Shane and Kirsty soon go into a call and response for a good chunk of the track before singing together in unison in that marvelous chorus about the boys of the NYPD choir singing Galway Bay and bells ringing out for Christmas Day. Even though the New York City Police Department, as far as I've looked up, in fact don't have a choir group, and the closest thing they do have, the pipe and drums, didn't even know Galway Bay. But hey, it's still a very catchy chorus, so we'll let inaccuracies slide here. However, then the next verse takes quite a turn as Shane and Kirsty turn on each other, calling each other bums, punks, scumbags, maggots, and a few other lovely words that I doubt YouTube would let me speak even with context, implying that they both fell under alcohol and drugs, leading to their relationship falling apart. The song goes to show how bad things would ultimately happen even during what's supposed to be a very good time like Christmas. Nonetheless, the song does have something of a bittersweet feeling from beginning to end. And like Wham's Last Christmas and the Darkness's Don't Let the Bells End, this too was kept at the Christmas number 2 spot back in 1987, with the number 1 in this case being the Pet Shop Boys cover of Gwen McCrae's Always on My Mind. That's 3 in a row in this top list so far. Number 5, Father Christmas by the Kinks. Now here's another underappreciated song from a classic rock band, and even more so, it's a Christmas punk song, being released back in 1977, and considering this was a band from the 1960s, and how a lot of punk fans back in the day would have had a general stance against what they would call dinosaur music, between stuff like this, Queen's News of the World, and Pink Floyd's Animals, these dinosaur bands really stuck it to the punk rock movement and subculture, as if to say that we can still be just as cool and hardcore as the young stuff the youngsters are into, and indeed are, as demonstrated. Not to mention, this too had been covered by many old rock bands like Cheap Trick, Green Day, Smash Mouth, Bad Religion, and Bowling for Soup, just to name a few. But I digress. Like a lot of punk rock songs of that era, this track has a bit of a satirical humour to it, while being a commentary on the state of things people were back then. Kinks' lead singer and frontman, as well as the writer of the song, Ray Davies, sings from the point of view of a working class employee having to dress up as a mall Santa for a department shop, only to get mugged by a gang of kids who demand not for presents, but for money. They even threaten to beat him up if he doesn't hand any over, which I don't even think the song itself acknowledged whether or not he even had any actual money on him. One of the verses goes on a bit into how one of the kids wants a job for his daddy since he's got a lot of mouths to feed. But then said kid says he wants a machine gun so he can scare all the kids in the street. So with that on top of threatening to assault a person who no doubt also may have a mouth or two to feed as well, some of these kids aren't exactly good in spirit. Then again, this is 1970s punk, what we're talking about. Good in spirit probably wouldn't even be entirely inaccurate, anyways. Aside from that, though, this is a pretty active and catchy song, with Dave Davies' spunky guitar riff and Mick Avery's drums and percussion. This track really got me going, and I could listen to this in any December, all day and all of the night. Number 4, Cold as Christmas in the Middle of the Year and Step Into Christmas, both by Elton John. Yes, we got another tie on this list. This one being about 2 songs by the Rocket Man himself, Sir Elton Hercules John, or Reginald Dwight if you want to know his real name. I'm sure some people out there would go on about how Cold as Christmas isn't a real Christmas song or something like that, but it has Christmas in the title, so it counts in my book. And even if it doesn't, it's still a really good track regardless. It's more about a dying and distant marriage, with Elton being in somewhere hot and tropical like the Caribbean, and yet still feeling so cold like Christmas, even when it's July in the middle of the year. Insert Christmas in July joke here, or in my case in tradition, Christmas in June, since June and December are actual opposite months, as opposed to July and January. The song demonstrates that even going to a different location or a different time doesn't easily fix up an unstable marriage, especially when they have children already observing this, and even being called by Elton on the telephone. Elton's music, as well as Bernie Taupin's lyrics, really do well at using such ideas and imagery to represent this sense of yearning for things to become better, even if one were to play this at a time like Christmas. Speaking of, that brings us over to Elton's other Christmas song, this one actually being more about the holiday, Step Into Christmas, released back in 1973, a whole decade before Cold as Christmas, or rather technically 9.5 years to be exact. Aside from being about Christmas, watching snowfall and smiling through the days, this does sound pretty much on par with Elton's music back in the classic period of the early to mid-70s, such as Caribou, Captain Fantastic, and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. As a result, it also does have a more dancey, upbeat vibe to it, with Elton's trademark piano, acoustic guitars, and even a few bells as well. Regardless of whichever's more about Christmas, both Elton John songs are still fantastic tracks and definitely should be played more often during this time of year. I'll also be sure to review the album of which Cold as Christmas is from, Too Low for Zero, next year, and maybe talk a bit more about it in depth, but for right now, we're down to the top 3. And the number 3, we have Lonely This Christmas by Mud. And only now do we have a song that was actually a Christmas number 1 for a change. How about that? Plus, even if you don't know this one by name, I'm sure many of you would have heard of it at least once or twice. At first you might think it was Elvis Presley singing this track, and I wouldn't entirely blame you for that either, since even I thought similarly at first. But in actual fact, that be the vocals of the late great Les Gray, who was already known for his distinct impression of the king of rock and roll. As for Mud, which Les is a member of, or was, they were, and still are, a glam rock band that had been around since the 1970s, and even had a few hit singles before, such as Dynamite and Tiger Feet, the latter of which was even the number 1 UK single of 1974. As for Lonely This Christmas, aside from Les Gray's sound-alike voice, the song itself does somewhat emulate the style of Elvis's music, specifically his slower and more sentimental material at the time. And funny enough, Elvis himself had done a Christmas album or two during his lifetime, so go figure. The lyrics here are fairly simple and to the point, capturing the feeling of being alone in such a time like Christmas, usually without friends, families, or loved ones. It's actually very touching and bittersweet. And anyone who has ever felt any remote grief or depression, even in this time of year, may likely find something to connect to here. One thing is for sure, though, Les Gray is somewhere up there, singing this song with the king himself. Merry Christmas, darling, whoever you are, and rock in peace. At number 2, Mistress for Christmas by AC/DC. I mean, come on, it's friggin' AC/DC. How could I not put a song of theirs, any song of theirs, on a top list like this one? And like The Darkness, AC/DC have quite a sense of humour, so they too take the mick out of conventional Christmas songs. This comes from their 1990 album, The Razor's Edge, and in it, Brian Johnson starts off by quoting Jingle Bells All the Way, and then goes on about how he can't wait till Christmas time when he can grope you in the hay. Sounds like a setup for a porno taking place inside a barn. Then Brian eventually sings with his distinct and recognizable banshee-like vocals about having a good time with lots of dough, slipping up high and slipping down low. He must really be into cookie dough, that cookie dough. Not sure I would want to cook and eat it though, especially if he's done something with it. Later, he says he likes a female in minimum dress and money to spend with a capital S, and he wants to date a woman in red and be in heaven with 3 women in bed. He wants a mistress for Christmas. This song is essentially a fun-poking comment on rich people as well as those who just want to have plenty of women to sleep with. According to the guitarist himself, Angus Young, the song was partially inspired by Donald Trump himself, who at the time was quite an eccentric millionaire. He even bought a Plaza Hotel back in 1988, and would make a little cameo in said hotel in 1992's Home Alone 2. It was indeed Christmas after all. As for the track itself, it's still pretty slamming, with the late and always great Malcolm Young strumming the rhythm guitar, his brother Angus screeching that lead guitar, Cliff Williams' underlining bass, and Chris Slade's drumming that sweet percussion as well, even with a few sleigh bells as well at the beginning. If you want a hard rocking Christmas tune, I absolutely recommend this a millionfold. AC/DC, rock on for Christmas. Before I actually get to number 1 though, here's a little bonus / honourable mention. In Dulce Jubilo, if I'm pronouncing that right, by Mike Oldfield. Anyone who actually knows me would know for sure that I'm a massive fan of Mike Oldfield, so I couldn't just forget to talk about this track, let alone put it on a top list of favourite modern Christmas songs. If it isn't Tubular Bells or Moonlight Shadow that old Mikey is well known for, then chances are good he's probably known for his rendition of the old German traditional Christmas carol of the same name, which is Latin for In Sweet Rejoicing. As a carol, there are words to sing to, but with Mike and his version, he doesn't need any vocals. All the instruments he plays, they do all the singing for themselves. And it's so fantastic just hearing out and into each of the individual instruments as they lay together on top of each other. The acoustic guitars, the flutes, the woodwinds, the pianos, synthesizers, drums, bass, and that exhilarating electric guitar, that sound that only Mike Oldfield could produce. Just layers upon layers of musical genius. It's bright, colourful, and even a bit bouncy. One could even do a little dance to it. This song is quite a sweet rejoice to listen to. If you really want a good and nostalgic Christmas song to play and dance to, I seriously recommend this one. It is that brilliant. And now we finally come to the number one spot. And that number one being I Believe in Father Christmas by Greg Lake. Oh, yes, that Greg Lake, as in Greg Lake of King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Now, the version I'm going for is the solo version with the orchestra. Some of you might know of the version from the ELP album Works Volume 2 from 1977, a more sparse arrangement without an orchestra. And as decent that version may be, I think the original does it best for me, just on an emotional level alone. And when I say emotional, I really mean so, both its music and its lyrics, written by King Crimson / ELP collaborator Peter Sinfield. Both Greg and Peter have their own ideas of this track, with the late Greg Lake making this as a protest against the rampant commercialization, dumbing down, and political correctness of the Christmas holiday, while Peter wrote this about losing one's own innocence and childhood. And to be perfectly honest, in my opinion, all these themes work together quite well. Greg sings about how they say there'll be snow on Christmas and peace on earth, and yet it keeps on raining, a veil of tears for the Virgin's birth. Obviously referring to promises made of peace, happiness, and joy for all adults and children, and yet never fulfilled. They sold him a dream of Christmas, a silent night, and a fairy story, until he believed in the Israelite. Likely representing how a time of giving and sharing, of being rewarded for such acts of good, love, and kindness like this, ends up getting exploited and used for greed, mere greed, mass profits, and corporate cynicism. That is until Greg finds or rediscovers his faith and remembering what the holiday truly means and its apparent true origin in Israel. He wakes up with a yawn in the first light of dawn, and he sees Father Christmas through his disguise. He believes in Father Christmas, or rather, what Father Christmas stands for. The willingness to be good and kind to others, to spread such goodwill to all, and such efforts being rewarded in the end. The hope, courage, and confidence to make this world of ours a better place for ourselves and for each other. And it's this hopeful Christmas and a brave new year that Greg bids and wishes us all the Christmas we get and deserve. In a way, this song tells us to never let go of the inner child within each and all of us, to grow up, but to never forget why. Sometimes, or even more often than not, the things in our lives and childhoods that we may perceive as childish are probably more adult than we might give them credit for they make us the adults we are now. We may grow up with them, all the toys, books, comics, music, films, TV programs, video games, etc. But the best ones of those are the ones that grow up with us, just as we grow up with them. As for the music itself, within its 3-minute and 30-second time length, it builds up upon layers and layers, much like in Dulce Jubileo by Mike Oldfield. Just starting with a simple melodic acoustic guitar, as well as Greg's own vocals, soon followed along by some choirs, a bit of synth, tambourine, and finally a big bombastic orchestra just ascending to above high heaven as it reaches its peak and climax. Just listening to that ending when the orchestra just completely takes over with triumph and enlightenment, and when they play out and just stretch that very last high note, just brings a man like me so high up and yet down in tears. I really mean it when I say that this is one of those few songs out there to actually still bring me to tears to this day. And as with some of the other tracks on this list, this song too managed to be the Christmas number 2 back in 1975, as the Christmas number 1 of that year was, believe it or not, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. Though to be fair, both songs are still pretty epic in scale and in general, really. But in terms of songs themed around Christmas in particular, this is the most epic, enrapturing, and emotional one there is in my eyes and ears. If you haven't listened to the song before, go find it and check it out now, any way you can. It's more than deserving of a listen in this time of year. And you better be prepared to have your heartstrings tugged and pulled like a guitar or violin. Greg Lake's I Believe in Father Christmas, my number 1 absolute favourite modern Christmas song. And so, that was my top list of favourite Christmas songs. And what do you folks at home think of it? And what are your favourite Christmas tunes that you'd like to listen to during this time of year? Or any time of Christmas for that matter? Let me know down below in the comment section. Next time, we close out the holiday season and this year of 2022 with something I've been wanting to tackle for a while now. Something to go out on with a bang. Something out of the blue.